a sound or you'll wake them in the deepest part of the ancient forest. The flickering candlelight illuminates the faded pages of a story. Hedgehog still sits and tells the stories that people dare not tell before.
The Court of Lost Hearts. Prologue, a handful of moonlight. In the village of Oakhaven, nestled against the dark, ancient expanse of the Wilderwood, children were taught two immutable truths. First, never venture into the forest after dusk. Second, and most importantly, never, ever say, thank you. The Fae who dwelt within the Wilderwood were not the benevolent sprites of children's picture books. They were the ethereals, ancient, powerful, and governed by a logic as alien and sharp as broken glass. They could not lie, but their truths were snares. They cherished beauty, but their aesthetic was one of stark, often cruel, contrasts. A human's gratitude was a chain, a debt that could be called upon in the most terrible of ways. A thank you was an open palm, and the Fae were always ready to place a price in it. Elara knew these stories better than anyone. Her grandmother, a woman with eyes like weathered stone and a voice that smelled of peat smoke, had carved the warnings into her soul. They are beautiful, child, like frost on a spider's web, she'd say, her gnarled hands carding Elara's silver blonde hair, and just as fragile, and just as deadly to the fly. But Elara was 17, and the warnings of the old are often kindling for the rebellion of the young. The Wilderwood called to her. On nights when the moon was full and white, she would stand at the tree line, listening to the impossible music that drifted from its depths, a melody that sounded like weeping crystal and laughing streams. She felt a pull, a kinship she could not explain, a longing that the simple, mud and wood reality of Oakhaven could never satisfy. One evening, her younger brother, Finn, delirious with a fever that the village healer could not break, cried out for water. The well was dry. Desperate, Elara did the unthinkable. She ran into the Wilderwood, following the sound of a stream she knew should not be there. She found it, a ribbon of liquid silver meandering through a clearing of bioluminescent flowers. As she knelt to fill her waterskin, a voice, smooth and cold as a river stone, spoke from behind her. The water is sweet, is it not? It holds the taste of forgotten dreams. Elara froze. Standing there was a man, or something that wore the shape of a man. He was tall and lithe, with hair the color of pale willow bark and eyes that shifted like molten mercury. He was dressed in robes of woven shadows and living moss. He was the most beautiful, terrifying thing she had ever seen. I only need water for my brother, she stammered, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The Fae Lord tilted his head. A noble cause. A life for a life. The balance of things. He gestured to the water. You may take it. It is a gift. Trembling, Elara filled her skin. The water was cool and shimmered with a faint internal light. As she turned to leave, relief overwhelming her caution, the words slipped out. Thank you. The air stilled. The music of the forest halted. The Fae Lord's lips curved into a smile that did not touch his ever-shifting eyes. My name is Lord Theron of the Glimmering Court, he said, his voice now holding a note of absolute ownership. And you, mortal child, have just given me a piece of your will. A small piece, to be sure. But a thread, once pulled, can unravel the entire tapestry. He reached out and, with a touch that burned like ice, brushed a strand of hair from her face. I will come for the rest. On the night of the next full moon, you will come to the Wilderwood. You will join my court. This is the price of your gratitude. Before she could scream, he was gone. The forest was just a forest again. Elara ran home, her blood turned to ice. Finn drank the water and his fever broke instantly. But when he looked at her, his eyes were clear, and he had no memory of ever being ill. The magic had healed him, but it had also stolen the memory of her sacrifice. Elara knew, with a sinking certainty, that her grandmother's stories were not just stories. They were a guidebook to survival, and she had just failed the simplest test. Chapter 1, The Gilded Cage. The month that followed was a slow descent into dread. The full moon grew from a sliver to a bloated, watchful eye. Elara tried to tell her parents, but the words stuck in her throat, tangled by an unseen force. She realized Theron's haze was already upon her. She could not speak of her bargain. She was alone. On the fated night, she walked into the Wilderwood, dressed in her simple woolen dress, her heart a lump of lead. She did not have to find her way. The path unfolded before her, trees shifting, roots retracting, leading her deep into the heart of the wood. She arrived in a clearing that defied reality. It was the Glimmering Court. The air hummed with magic. Trees were sculpted from silver and crystal, their leaves chiming softly. Fairies with moth-like wings and eyes of solid gold danced in the air, their laughter like shattering icicles. Others, more imposing, sat on thrones of twisted root and polished bone. They were all devastatingly beautiful, and their beauty was a weapon. At the center of it all was Lord Theron, upon a throne of living, blooming nightshade. Elara of Oakhaven, he announced, his voice carrying through the glade. You are welcome. You have come to pay your debt. I have come because you forced me, she said, her voice trembling but clear. Force is such an ugly word, Theron purred. I merely collected what was freely offered. Gratitude is a currency, little mortal. You spent yours. He rose and approached her. Your life in that village is over. You are a story they will forget. Here, you will be something more. You will be an ornament in my court. A pet. A living reminder of the fragility of humanity. He snapped his fingers, and two fey ladies with cruel, sharp smiles approached. They led her away to a bower woven from weeping willow and moonflowers. They stripped her of her homespun dress and clad her in a gown of spider silk and starlight, which was cold and clung to her like a second skin. They placed a delicate, silver circlet on her brow, and when she looked in a pool of still water that served as a mirror, she saw a stranger, a pale, elegant creature, a perfect doll. This was her new existence. She was forced to attend their endless, sinister revels. They danced to music that could make one remember joys they never had and sorrows they never experienced. They drank wine that tasted of nostalgia and ate fruits that burst with flavors of lost opportunities. The Fae were fascinated by her humanity, the way a cat is fascinated by a wounded bird. They would ask her about love, about grief, about the fleeting nature of mortal life. They drank in her stories, her emotions, as if they were the finest vintage. They particularly loved tales of heartbreak and sacrifice. Her pain was their entertainment. She learned their rules. Never eat their food, or you would be bound to this place forever. Never give them your true name, for names had power. And never, ever, make a bargain. She saw what happened to those who did. A minstrel who had bargained for a voice that could charm the birds from the trees was now a human-shaped songbird, trapped in a gilded cage, singing until his voice bled. A knight who had asked for an unbreakable sword now stood as a stone statue, his sword forever raised, a permanent guardian. The Glimmering Court was a beautiful, gilded cage, and Elara was its newest canary. Chapter 2, The Thorned Prince and the Hollow Queen. Not all in the court were alike. Elara soon learned of its politics. Lord Theron ruled the Celia-aligned ethereals, those of the light, who found their amusement in the gentle cruelties of manipulation and emotional theft. But there was another faction, the Unseelie, the court of shadowed moss, who dwelt in the deeper, darker parts of the Wilderwood. Their ruler was the Morrigan, a queen whose beauty was that of a predatory cat and whose heart was said to be a frozen stone. The Unseelie did not bother with subtlety. Their pleasures were of the hunt, the raw fear, the spilled blood. And then there was Kaelen. He was called the Thorned Prince. The son of the previous Seelie king and a mortal woman, he was a half-breed, an outcast in both worlds. He did not dance at the revels. He stood at the edges, his presence a dark stain on the glittering proceedings. Where Theron was polished silver, Kaelen was wrought iron. His beauty was harsh, his features sharp, and a crown of living, black thorns grew from his brow, a constant, painful reminder of his mixed blood. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, held a humanity that was absent in the full-blooded Fae. He was the first to speak to Elara without a veneer of mockery or predatory interest. They will break you, you know, he said one evening, his voice a low rumble. He had found her hiding in a grove of silver-barked trees, weeping silent tears that turned to tiny pearls as they hit the ground. Another gift from Theron. What choice do I have? She whispered, wiping the pearls away, disgusted. There is always a choice, Kaelen replied. Often, they are all terrible. But a choice nonetheless. You can let them pick you apart, emotion by emotion, until you are a hollow shell they use to store their wine. Or you can fight. How can I fight them? They are immortal. I am nothing. You are human, he said, and for the first time, she heard no disdain in the word. That is your strength. They are creatures of stasis, of endless, repeating patterns. You are change. You are unpredictability. You can feel a genuine emotion without having to steal it from someone else. That terrifies them more than any iron blade. He told her his story, how his mother had been a mortal queen who bargained for a child of great power. She got her wish, but died in childbirth, her life force spent to create a being that belonged nowhere. The thorned crown had grown on his brow the day he came of age, a manifestation of his inner conflict, forever piercing his skin. I am a reminder of what they fear most, Kaelen said. The messy, passionate, unpredictable power of mortality. Theron keeps me here as a cautionary tale. The Morrigan would see me torn apart for the sin of my birth. Elara looked at him, truly looked, and saw not a monster, but a prisoner like herself. A spark of alliance, fragile and dangerous, was kindled between them. Chapter 3: The Unraveling Hayas. Kaelen became her secret tutor. He taught her the deeper lore of the Fae, the loopholes in their ancient laws. The Hayas he placed on you binds your tongue, but not your hands, he instructed her in the hidden, moonlit glades where they met. You cannot speak of the bargain, but you can write of it. You cannot refuse his direct commands, but you can interpret them in creative ways. Their power is in precision. Your power is in ambiguity. Elara began to write. Using a sharp thorn and sap that turned black as ink, she wrote her story on the large, smooth leaves of the moonfall plant. She wrote of Theron, of the bargain, of the cage, of her thanks. She could not speak it, but she could document it. It was a tiny act of rebellion, but it was hers. She also began to observe Theron more closely. She saw the way his eyes lingered on a particular crystal rose in the court, a perfect, glowing bloom that never wilted. She saw a flicker of something, not love, but a deep, obsessive possession, when he looked at it. Kaelen, when asked, told her the story. The Rose of Ethel, he said, it contains the last breath of the first Seelie Queen. It is the anchor of his power, the source of the Glimmering Court's light. If it were to be destroyed, his power would wane significantly. A plan, desperate and fraught with peril, began to form in Elara's mind. She could not break her Hayas directly, but she could make Theron break it for her. At the next revel, as the music reached its crescendo, she acted. She walked directly to the pedestal where the Rose of Ethel sat glowing. She did not touch it. Instead, she turned to Theron, who was watching her with amused curiosity. "My lord," she said, her voice clear and carrying, "this rose is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Your court is the most wondrous place I have ever been. I am so very grateful for this experience." She poured every ounce of false feeling into that word, grateful. The court fell silent. Theron's amused smile vanished. She had just offered him another thread of gratitude, a public one, in front of his entire court. But this gratitude was for the prison itself. It was a tangled, messy emotion, wrapped around the very source of his power. By the strict, unyielding laws of the Fae, he had to accept it. He had to place a price on it. But how do you price gratitude for a prison that houses the anchor of your power? To accept it was to acknowledge the debt was not yet paid, complicating his original claim on her. To refuse it was to break his own nature. A snarl of pure rage twisted his beautiful features. The precision of his magic was being fouled by her human ambiguity. "You clever, wretched thing," he hissed, his form flickering for a moment, revealing something ancient and skeletal beneath. "You seek to bind me with my own rules." "The rules are the rules, are they not, Lord Theron?" she said, echoing his own words back to him. In his fury, he made a mistake. He gestured violently towards her. "You will not touch my rose. You will not speak of it again. This I command." And in that moment, the Hayas shifted. He had specifically forbidden her from touching or speaking of the rose. But he had said nothing about what others might do. Chapter 4: A Crown of Thorns and a Heart of Iron. Elara had played her hand. The court was in an uproar. Theron's authority was challenged, his control shown to be vulnerable to a mortal's cunning. He could not harm her directly without breaking the pact initiated by her gratitude, but his wrath was a palpable, cold fire. She knew her time was short. She went to Kaelen. "You have to take it," she whispered urgently in their hidden glade. "The rose. He has forbidden me. He has not forbidden you." Kaelen looked at her, his stormy eyes wide with shock. To steal the Rose of Ethel. It would be war. It would shatter the Seelie Court. "Will that be so terrible?" Elara pressed. "Look at what this order has built. A court of parasites, a kingdom of beautiful lies. You told me I had a choice. Well, I am choosing to fight. Will you?" She saw the war within him, the fear of the outcast, the longing for a place to belong, warring with the centuries of bitterness and the spark of hope she had ignited. He looked at her fierce, mortal determination, and something in him broke free. "Yes," he said, his voice firm. "I will." The plan was set for the night of the lunar eclipse, when the powers of the Fae were at their most chaotic and the veil between the Seelie and unseelie realms was thinnest. The court would be distracted by a wild, dangerous revel. As the moon began to bleed into shadow, the Glimmering Court descended into a frenzy of ecstatic madness. Under the cover of the cacophony, Kaelen, using his knowledge of the court's secret pathways, slipped towards the Rose of Ethel. Elara created a diversion. She stood before Theron and began to sing. It was an old mortal lullaby, a simple, aching song of home and loss her grandmother had taught her. It was a sound so alien, so genuinely heartfelt, that it cut through the Fey music. The court stopped to stare, captivated by this raw, unvarnished emotion. Theron was mesmerized, his rage mixed with a terrible, hungry fascination. It was all the time Kaelen needed. He reached the rose. As his fingers, stained with both Fey and mortal blood, closed around the stem, the thorned crown on his brow flared with dark light. The rose resisted, its light burning him, but his mixed nature, his very flaw, allowed him to withstand it where a pure Fey could not. He pulled it from its pedestal. The second the rose was free, the glimmering court flickered. The silver trees tarnished. The crystal leaves lost their chime. The music died. Theron let out a scream of pure, undiluted fury. He turned from Elara, his form swelling with terrible power. Half-breed, traitor. Kaelen stood holding the glowing rose, facing the enraged lord. The court is broken, Theron. Your time is over. What do you think will happen? Theron snarled. The Unseelie will pour in. The Wilderwood will drown in blood. You have doomed us all. Then we will build something new from the ashes, Kaelen said, his voice ringing with authority he had never possessed. Something that is not built on the theft of mortal hearts. In his rage, Theron broke the most ancient law of all. He drew a blade of pure, solidified moonlight, a weapon meant for ceremony, not combat, and lunged at Kaelen. But Elara was there. She threw herself between them. The moonblade, never meant to touch mortal flesh, did not pierce her. Instead, it shattered on contact with her humanity, the backlash of broken magic exploding outwards. The shockwave threw Theron back, his beautiful form cracking like porcelain. It hurled Kaelen and Elara through the fraying fabric of the Glimmering Court and back into the mortal world, at the very edge of the Wilderwood. Epilogue, the wild peace. They landed in a heap of tangled limbs and gasping breath. The rose of Ethel lay between them, its light dimmed but steady. The forest around them was just a forest, ancient, dark, but no longer humming with predatory magic. The Glimmering Court was gone, shattered from within. The Fey were not destroyed, but scattered, their power broken. The Unseelie, sensing the shift, had retreated to their deep shadows, leaderless and confused. Kaelen and Elara were free, but they were exiles. He could not return to the Fey world, and she could not return to her village, for time flowed differently in the courts. A month for her had been a decade for them. Oakhaven was a place of strangers. So, they built a new life, together, at the border of the Wilderwood. Kaelen, his thorned crown now blooming with tiny, white flowers alongside the black thorns, learned to tend a garden and feel the slow, simple passage of mortal seasons. Elara, her hair now streaked with a single lock of silver that would never fade, taught him about love that was given, not bargained for. The rose of Ethel, they planted at the edge of their garden. It took root in the mortal soil, and as it grew, it did not glow with Fey light, but with a softer, warmer radiance. It became a bridge, a new kind of anchor. Sometimes, on certain nights, mortal children with a touch of the wild in them would come to listen, and they would hear a new kind of music drifting from the woods. Not one of weeping crystal, but of wind through leaves and the quiet, resilient heartbeat of a world finding a new, wilder, more honest peace. Elara never said, "Thank you," again. But she taught her children, and her children's children, a different word, one that held just as much power, but was a gift that could never be stolen: love.
If you feel a chill down your spine, don't worry. They're just standing behind you, listening with you. Thank you for daring to enter the world of fairy tales of Nim. We'll see you again next night, if you're still around.